So my name is Megan Kirby. I am the Dissemination and Implementation Specialist for Language Dynamics Group. I am not on video today due to being out of town and having to use the system of out here at another school district out of state. So I think that's a privacy setting they have set up. So I'm sorry, I even did my makeup. Today we're going to go over multi-tiered system of language supports. So I'm going to kind of introduce the term to you, but we're going to start with just looking at, what is MTSS? Like, what is the true definition of it? What is it supposed to be? What is it not, right? And then from there, kind of go into why the L? Why are we going to add another word to MTSS? So basically just a review for folks that do or do not know about MTSS. It stands for Multi-Tiered System of Supports, right? So it's a framework. It's basically used by schools to organize instruction and all instruction. So it's supposed to provide this model or framework or system that allows the whole school to differentiate instructions. So based on students' individual needs, their answers provided as to how we can best effectively, one, implement universal screening. So that's a core element. Two, progress monitoring, core element. The third is tiered instruction. So there is a curriculum, a program that's available at all levels. So we'll go over what that means. And that MTSS also includes data-based team decision-making. Now, this is something that an entire school needs to use as a model. And so when we say, a system of support, we're not talking about RTI. I'll get into the difference between MTSS and response to intervention, or RTI, in the next slide. But basically, MTSS is a model schools use to support academic and non-academic needs of students. It's student-centered. It's an educational framework. School teams are basically created, and at the beginning of the school year, they get together and they identify where students are at via universal screening. Right? Then they used the data that they gather to make informed decisions about which students are at risk and need additional supports. But do they have the curriculum to address the needs of all students, right? Do they have the tools to support the instruction that all students need, not just some who are, I guess, identified in need of an intervention, right? And then already in place in that classroom, because the whole school has looked at this, and the school teams involve more than just like the grade level teachers, right? They include SLPs and special ed, their teams, the multidisciplinary teams. They basically come up with a list of curricula that teachers should have in their general education classrooms that are empirically supported evidence-based tools, okay? And that also includes progress monitoring tools so that they can use them intermittently to see if further intervention is needed, or if maybe there are some concerns. And that's where that word RTI, or that the acronym, comes in. It's a response to intervention. Okay, so there need to be differences between response to intervention and MTSS, very clear. Before I get into that, I will answer the question. You will receive a certificate link in an email. If not at the end of this webinar, if I forget, but in an email, follow-up email, if you registered for this webinar, and then you will be able to fill out that certificate and use it for what PD or CEs that you need. Okay. All right. So going back to MTSS and RTI, right? Both are problem-solving models, so that's what they have in common. But the key differences between these two things is that RTI specifically is talking about academic support system for students who are quote unquote at risk or struggling students. I learned a new term today out here in Tacoma, but basically, rather than say struggling students, students who have not previously received the supports that they need, right? Like who are previously unsupported or not able to access those supports, right? I don't know, place the blame on them for systems not in place. I thought that was interesting. But the key word here, though, for RTI is that RTI was designed to help teachers address the needs of students who are already found to not be performing at grade level. So the whole emphasis is on the identification and support of students at risk for failure or failing, right? So in other words, in our TI model, not all students are in need of intervention, right? And so not all students are a part of the RTA process. It's just for some. Conversely, like MTSS, it's holistic. It goes beyond the classroom. It's the entire school, and it focuses on providing that high quality level instruction and interventions at 3 different levels. So MTSS might have those 3 tiers of RTI, right? But it's including other programs, and it focuses on, all children, not just the ones in need. So interventions aren't just available for only those students who are at risk and struggling and brought up to child study teams or, eligibility meetings and testing. It's all students, because at any given point, just think about it, any one of us, we're not experts in all of our subject matters. All of us have strengths. And then we have areas where we could, we're engaged in continuous improvement, right? And so if you think of that, that's the MTSS model. But maybe there's an area, like myself personally, if I were learning a foreign language, oof, I am in trouble, right? So personally, so in that particular case, if this were critical to my academic success, I most likely would find myself within an RTI framework. Because there's going to need to be intervention. That just does not come easy to me. Okay, so then you think about like just the construct, right, of RTI. And in the end, I want you to just kind of sit with this. The construct itself, RTI, is used in MTSS, like in the model, and often it's talked about like by most people that it refers to identification of students in need of special education services, to be honest. And that's really how it's being used. So unless I'm wrong and your district is actually using these terms correctly, and give a shout out to them in the chat, most of the time folks are using the term MTSS or the acronym, but really what they're talking about is RTI. Okay, so we definitely just want to make sure that MTSS, and it's very clear that MTSS is for all students, and it's a preventative model of intervention that can be provided to anybody who just might need a little something extra, right? So in summary, like, what is MTSS and what is it not? MTSS is not something that we put students in. Okay, so it's not a thing. It's a model that schools or systems operate in. It's basically like a philosophy or a theory that is practiced at the school level or even like district level, right? So it can't be a curriculum. And because it's not a curriculum or a specific program intervention, it's not something that only specialized staff get to implement. You can't have a certificate in MTSS because what are you a master of? So this is where it's something that not one person practices. Again, it's a belief or philosophy or a framework that is operated by everybody within that particular system. And that's why we love MTSS for language development, right? For teaching language skills, because MTSS relies on multidisciplinary problem-solving teams, not just one profession being the expert in anything in particular, right? So it's almost, I'll call out my behavior analyst since I am one. I'm a BCBA, and I used to work in school systems. Like the behavior analysts in school systems aren't supposed to be just, experts at quote unquote behavior. That makes me cringe because everybody is. We all behave, right? And so that's really where we probably to solve the whole world's problems, it would be better, right, if we all got together and got along and worked in multidisciplinary teams. But the biggest problem that schools often have in creating a workplace that respects and honors and really champions multidisciplinary teamwork and has collaboration among different professionals, those schools tend to have MTSS systems. All right, so without that kind of mentality at the highest levels, it's going to be really hard to, and probably only at the school level if you've got a principal or a leader at your individual school or even grade level to find really great collaborative teams, right? So I just wanted to go over like what the tiers really mean. And so I color coded them too based on basically, based on what we have in Story Champs, so that you'll recognize these colors based on the lesson plans. But what do the tiers really mean? Tier 1 is basically whole class or large group, and it's grade level instruction. And that grade level instruction is actually coming from a research-based curricula. That is what it should be coming from. And so approximately 80% of students, right, give or take, because these numbers are averages and every place might be different. But approximately 80% of students at any given time are really only going to require that tier 1 instruction, or that like just general education classroom teacher delivering a lesson to the whole group, right? Or in a bunch of small groups during literacy centers. But tier 2 is, think of it as an additive, like an extra dose. All right. So everybody gets tier 1, including the kids that aren't meeting grade level expectations at any given moment for that particular subject area. Tier 2 is small group supplemental intervention. And so at tier 2, we target specific outcomes when students aren't demonstrating that tier 1 progress is enough. Okay. And so then we've got, so everybody gets tier 1, and then there's like an extra little small group session. So usually it's about like 15% of students that tend to be in the gen ed classroom, and they need a little extra booster shot, right? A supplemental small group lesson in addition to that whole group. And often, so when I was in the classroom, that would be during my literacy centers. So I would run a story champs lesson to the whole class early in the morning. And then when I had my small group, whether it be math or reading or whatever, any kids that fell into that 15% that needed an extra little story champs lesson, I would run small group story champs with them, and only them, not everybody. It's only one of me. And I got a lot to implement in my school week. Then we come into like tier 3. So tier 3 is, there's about 5% of students. Again, this is just like averages on average, but 5% of students who are going to require more intensive and individualized instruction. And they need that in addition to the large group. So they participate in that like whole class instruction, but at another part of the day or even another part of the week. Okay, I will meet with that student one-on-one and deliver a one-on-one story champs lesson. Okay, I skip past the small group. And sometimes, and I would know, and we can kind of look at how we would know later on, but I would know to just skip past small group if they're really, really like not cutting it. They are nowhere close to what the grade level expectations are when I'm doing universal screening. That I'm like, oof, I'm not going to like waste their time or mine if I don't think they're going to make enough progress in small groups. So I just put them into one-on-one, right? And I'm a teacher, and that's what I actually had a classroom, not lying. I would know, I know my students. And so hopefully I can get them kind of caught up with this really intensive individualized instruction, that then I can take this off my plate and get them back, and their plate, and get them back to just needing that whole group, or kind of a lower level of care, right? That small group. So I'm not doing one-on-one forever, hopefully. If I am, I've got some concerns, and that's maybe where RTI comes in, right? Okay. If you have any questions, just throw them in the chat and I'll get to you in related to this. I will always share a recording of every webinar that we do, and I will make sure to send it with a link to a certificate at the end of this webinar. So if you want to review it or share, you can. Okay, so in summary, right, like that was just a review of what multi-tiered systems of support is. And that could be for behavior, it could be for, so academics and non-academics alike, right? So it's everything. Boom, boom, boom. Here's where the L comes in, right? So why are we adding an L? And it was in the title of this webinar, but why add an L to MTSS? Right now, and I would love, shout out, I'll get you something. My Australia folks, if you can give me a stat like this and email it to me at the end, I will give you a prize. Right now, more than 1 out of 3 US 4th graders cannot demonstrate basic reading skills. I'm not talking about proficient, like it's just they're failing the reading exam and they cannot demonstrate basic reading skills, so not even proficient. And we're not talking about decoding and phonics alone, right? Just imagine, like, if you can decode something beautifully, awesome, good for you. Like, it is important, right? But how can you understand something if you don't have the language to understand it? So you decoded it and you read a word, congratulations. But if you don't have language to understand what it is you're reading, what was the point of reading in the first place? You're just listing out a bunch of words or letters or you're making sounds. That is not communication. That is not going to get you a job. Okay. And so what we believe is that it's really strong academic oral language that is critical for bolstering students' success in school, right? Because most educational standards, actually, I would probably say all, they include objectives for speaking and listening in addition to reading and writing. And these language skills are actually just all highly like they're all related to one another. And the reason why they're in the standards is that because they are essential for academic success. Students who do not have adequate oral language foundation, like a foundation built early on in oral language, are going to have significant problems meeting academic expectations until that is remediated or will become a lifelong problem. Really wish you could see my face here because it gets me worked up. So enter this multi-tiered system of language supports, right? Trina and Doug introduced this term. This is not mine. They went back and forth, and really as a team we've discussed this because what MTSLS. So why did the L? What we're really saying is MTSS for reading, and that exists. People will say that, right? MTS for reading. But we don't want to use that term anymore. Like, we believe that it's not just reading. We want language to be front and center in the reading MTSS. So our MTSS for reading language should be like the word, right? It's so when most people really, like, when we say MTSLS, some people think like, oh, well, that's for speech and language pathologists because they hear language, right? Like, that's something separate from reading. And in actuality, and that really depresses us. In actuality, the distinction that we're making is that language is so important that it deserves to be right front and center, and that letter deserves to be in there. So people remember that language is essential, and like language comprehension is essential to reading, right? You could decode all day and you can have those word level decoding skills, but you also, to be a good reader, skilled reader, or actually just have reading comprehension skills, right? You have to have language comprehension. And so people are forgetting about that, right? We're focusing on a lot of phonics and decoding curricula, and I'm glad teachers and specialists finally have the curricula that they have been needing for so long that are based in science, that have been shown for decades to work. They finally have stuff to be able to teach phonological awareness, right? But the L is not there, right? It's absent in these reading programs, in these literacy programs. And language, honestly, if you think about it, needs to be there not just for reading, but for math and science. It needs to be there for behavior, right? So language is integral to all of these things, and we believe, that schools really should be recognizing the importance of language. It shouldn't just be, the few who happen to have specialties, right, in speech and language pathology who have this developmental knowledge. I mean, I was a teacher. I am no expert. I went to good schools. I can brag. I have a PhD. I studied under Trina. My SLPs are my best friends. They are my experts, and I don't have time for another degree. So why would I want to be an expert in something my friends are already good at, or already have strengths in? But this is how we get SLPs involved in actually teams before students start showing failure. Like, before we allow students to contact failure and ruin their lives and make them hate school, those SLPs are involved before we allow students to contact failure. Okay, so in a MTSS, or sorry, I'm gonna start using my own term. In an MTSLS program, right? Screening and progress monitoring is one of two. There are two out of the four core principles or core components of the system or the framework. Okay, so when we're using screening and progress monitoring, and put this up here, this is on Instagram, just pulled them from our post a while ago. We have two types of assessments that we can use, right? We can use criterion referenced, or we can use norm referenced assessments, okay? Criterion reference, we're gonna tell you right now, are the things that are most suitable for MTSLS. It's because they have a criterion or a benchmark score that every student, because remember, MTSS is not just for, it's not RTI. It's not just for the ones that are affiliate. It's for every student. They have these expectations and these levels of achievement that we should expect of our students, right? In gen ed. And so if they are not performing at, never mind, above that criterion, right? In an MTSS model, if 80% of our first graders are not meeting benchmark in oral language, like a retell, that doesn't mean 80% of our first graders have IEPs now. They do not have language disability. That's not what we're saying. You know, the purpose of doing universal screening and having these criterion reference measures is to say, ooh, maybe no one taught this to them in kindergarten. Like maybe our kindergarten teachers don't have the tools and resources to teach language comprehension. Oops, like this is what we're saying. So the focus then at that point needs at tier 1 needs to be providing and equipping our teachers with evidence-based resources and tools that are already made, that are already shown to be effective, and that already come in whole group, small group, and one-to-one lesson plans. So who has time to differentiate? No one. So we need to have curricula that are already that already have that made for them, right? You can imagine what slide I'm going to get to later on. So like, continue to get worked up here. Unfortunately, though, here there are like very, 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 very few criterion referenced assessments for language, like language comprehension. Just a note, listening comprehension and language comprehension, two different things. For my friends out there who didn't know that, like I didn't when I was teaching. I'm not knocking on teachers tonight. I'm worked up. Not given the help they need. But anyway, so there's not enough. So we do offer the cubed, and I'll get to that so that you can download it. You can get it for free from our website on the bottom right-hand corner right here. Actually, there's like 3 places where I put our website. So if you just go to the website, you can download the cubed for free. We've got tons of videos for you to learn how to use it, but they're criterion referenced. I'm not a huge fan, and we wouldn't use norm referenced assessments for universal screening and progress monitoring. That is for RTI and eligibility screening. Like that's if we know and we're concerned and we want to assess someone for possibly a language impairment or developmental language delay, right? That is a different purpose. We also hate norms. Maybe hate's a strong word, but we're not huge fans of norms anyway, because again, think back to 1 out of 3 kids in the United States can't read, and that's the norm. What is, like, if you get a percentile rank, like, what does that mean when 1 out of 3 kids can't read? I don't know. So that's kind of where we're at. So our recommendation, right, is that we use curriculum-based assessments, and those are going to be our criterion referenced assessments. The cubed is one example, right? And so we've got narrative language measures listening, we've got the narrative language measures reading. They cover, again, it's MTSS, so they're covering grade levels preschool through grade 3. You can use them with older students, but at this point in this multi-tiered system of language supports, they cover all of those grades so that gen ed teachers can use them and other people as well. And we've got alternate forms, we've got parallel stories, we've got all this stuff. So if you're interested in learning more, tonight is not the night. So there's some recordings up on our website. Okay. So right here is kind of what we put together and what Trina and Doug designed so that there could finally be MTSS for language. So in order to make this multi-tiered system of language supports work, we have to have assessment and intervention. The assessment piece has to fulfill 3 purposes. You have to have universal screening, so like beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year, right? So that universal screening can help us answer the question, hey, what do these students need? And not some students, all students. All right, the second thing, we have to have assessments that allow us to plan interventions, and I use that word loosely, that allow us to plan instruction, let's say, so that we know what both individual students in our classrooms and just as a whole, like the grade level, kind of where they're at and what did they learn last year and what do they need to get before they get to those 4th grade reading exams, so that we know kind of what we might need to order in terms of providing teachers with those curricula. We also need assessments that monitor progress within and then relevant to the instructional tool that we're using or the intervention that we're using. Okay, so we've got students and we're delivering really high quality instruction, and then we're going to monitor the progress of students who might be in that tier 2 and tier 3, the supplemental instruction, those extra doses of instruction that our teachers are giving because they're using data to inform those decisions, right? So here we go. We offer the Pearl, which is a kindergarten language and dyslexia screener. It predicts dyslexia 6 years into the future. If you are curious about that, we have a recorded webinar with certificate for CEs housed on the website on our recorded webinars page. And so you can learn a lot about that. Doug and I do that together, and it's very exciting. We're all jazzed up. So if you're sleepy, that's the one to watch. We've got an assessment, the cubed assessment, which comes with 3, so that's why it's cubed, right? Think to the third power. 3 measures. So we've got the narrative language measure listening, narrative language measure reading, and dynamic decoding measures. So you can get those now for free. You can download those from our website. Please do so if you're not sure you have the most recent copy. We will also be updating that very, very soon. If Doug can stop adding things to the tests, it's making our lives a little bit harder because Olivia keeps having to reformat these PDFs. Anyway, so those will be out sometime next year, and I just want to encourage you, like, we're going to have some data that are during and post, well, I don't know about post-pandemic, but our data that we've collected on these new newer updated measures are going to include data that aren't from like the 1990s, right? They're not ancient. We're not, we have norms that we're going to have that are collected from children who have experienced a adverse childhood event of a disrupted childhood. So of course that is affecting their language, and we're seeing that in research. And so it's only just that we look at what norms are now, right? And then we have intervention. And so that's kind of where Story Champs comes in right there. That is our multi-tiered instruction, our program, our curricula, and it also can be used as intervention. All right. So in our cubed manual, I believe this appears, but basically, I don't know, one reason we're probably seeing really, really, really poor reading outcomes in 4th grade and even like older students is because students aren't being screened and identified at possibly maybe not having that language nutrition that they needed earlier in life, right? And as early as kindergarten, we have tools like the Pearl that can identify students who need extra supplemental, like more attention. Otherwise, they're going to fail. So as early as kindergarten, we can predict failure, reading failure 6 years in the future, just using this dynamic assessment of language and decoding, and that is the Pearl. So universal screening is key to any evidence-based language program. And when we screen, 2 to 3 times per year, the beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year, or even at like the beginning and middle, okay, we're going to get data about the effectiveness of our instructional tools, right? We're also going to identify students who indicate that they're at risk for later language difficulties, and we can get them the help before they fail, right? So if we look at this right here, right, our assessment is driving the delivery of our instruction, right? And so this timeline here provides an overview of these cubed subtests. So the DDM, dynamic decoding measures, are narrative language measures. We got reading and listening, right? And I want you to see on the bottom here on this, if I were to think of it as an x-axis, but the bottom here are these, this would be primary, right, or pre-primary and primary. Grade 1 is our students who are, so kindergarten is our 5, 6 years old, 6, 7, 7, 8, thereabouts. So my folks who are over in Australia or in Canada, they can go ahead and basically kind of figure this out because this is definitely United States language. So what we would recommend if we're using this as benchmark or universal screening, let's say we are in 1st grade, at the beginning of the year, if I go up this column right here, Anything that appears in a dark blue is what we recommend as a standard administration. So from first grade at the beginning of the year, phoneme blend. So let me actually start in order. The dynamic decoding measures, the phonemic awareness subtest, right? Target 1 phoneme segmentation. And then if they don't pass, they don't meet that criterion, the minimum number scores and all of this information is in that webinar. But if they don't meet that, then I go ahead and deliver, it's dynamic, remember? So I go ahead and deliver the first sounds subtest. And if they didn't meet that, then I also do the phoneme blending, right? Right here, it's for word identification in that subtest or that target. I want to give irregular words. And if they do not meet that criterion to then move on to another test, right? I'm going to do letter sounds. And then the same goes with decoding. Okay, so the silent E, CCBC, and CVC. All right. And then I've got right here in the beginning of your first grade, the only thing in blue is narrative language measures listening retail. And you're going to see that starting really in second grade, we've heard a lot of feedback. Again, this is why we get to, and we own and have the copyright for all these things. So we get to update them whenever we want. We don't have to let publishers tell us we can't until they sell out of everything they're selling. And so why we're updating is we've listened, we've got feedback, and also our own research has shown that one, man, our first graders really aren't reading where the standards said that they should be reading. So we got it, and so we don't recommend the narrative language measures reading until students can decode 40 words at least in a passage per minute. So if they can't do that, let's say any of these grade levels, you gave a student the NLM reading, especially in these older grades, I wouldn't give the listening first. I'd give the reading, and if they don't decode 40 words in that first minute, I stop that. I'm not going to ask them to keep reading. I'm not going to be measuring language comprehension or reading comprehension. I'm going to be measuring decoding. That kid, all their calories are going to be focusing and struggling. So if they can't do that, that's when you would give the listening. Just shut it down. All right. Okay. Then we have, so I got a question about what's pros and cons about nonsense words. That will be in our Pearl and our cubed webinar, but nonsense words are great if you're using them in a dynamic assessment because they reduce linguistic bias. You can't come to the table with that background knowledge because they're words you've never seen, but we do like to use those because it does reduce that bias. I mean, if you think about it and you have children and you're a SLP, chances are your kids can be a little bit more prepared. If they are, there's no developmental concerns, right? They're probably achieving a little bit higher than others because you've been working on it because you know this stuff, right? So that's not fair for for us to have words that they might have been exposed to or sounds. Okay, so I've got this whole layout. Let's say I used universal screening. To make database decisions, that's one of the core tenets of MTSLS. My decisions have to include 1, who needs intervention? 2, who needs instruction and intervention, but what should be taught, right, to everybody, and then what should be intervened upon, and then when should I adjust that intervention? So if I'm using the Pearl, I'm used as a universal screener to figure out what students need and then what they need to be taught. That informs my instruction, and then I can use the cubed narrative measures, the NLM listening, because I'm talking about kindergarten here, and then I can also use the cubed dynamic decoding measures to use my progress monitoring and then do benchmarking later on, okay? Because Pearl is not for that, it's a screener. Okay, so in that cubed manual, man, I wish I wrote, it's figure 2, that's what I know, it's in the regular cubed manual. Really, this is going to be an example of like your decision making, like a flow chart that we provide. This is for preschool and kindergarten. You can use this as a frame of reference for how often do you have to administer subtests and which ones to give and when, and it's just kind of decision making tree. Again, this is provided for free on our website when you download the cubed and you open the manual. For the older grades, this is 1st through 3rd. Here's the flow chart that would guide your decision making. This is you're engaged in MTSLS. Here's your decision making tool. And then, yeah, this is the the kind of flow for this. We do recommend that the NLM reading, it's a parallel assessment for like first through third grade. It's parallel to the NLM listening. We recommend that, when students are old enough they can decode, use the reading. You don't need to use the listening anymore. But if students can't decode and they have decoding problems and you want to measure language comprehension, enter NLM listening. That's what we use in our research for students who struggle with reading to actually serve as a proxy for reading comprehension. And so if it's good enough for researchers to be able to do it, it's good enough for you. We're not cheating. So, all right, I threw this slide in here because I want to point out, and this has happened before. And so this is the disclaimer, I told you so. What if most students fail to meet benchmark when you're doing universal screening? So this goes for MTSLS or anything in MTSS. You could insert math instruction here, right? If if more than 80% or more of the students are meeting the benchmark, like we're hunky-dory. And if you think back to that circle, right? So 80% of the students, they're making progress at tier 1, just whole group instruction, continue. The other 20% of those students, that 15 and 5 on the previous slide, they should be receiving supplemental tier 2 or tier 3 academic language intervention. So that could mean that, and this does not mean they're a specialist. This does not mean a referral for special ed. This is just called good teaching and best practice and what students deserve, right? So you want to consider, if I'm a teacher, I am going to intensify my instruction. So I might have been doing 1 lesson of Story Champs a week. Now I'm going to move it up to 2 by having 1 lesson in a whole group. And then I'm going to do a small group lesson for my students that just are kind of at risk. And then I might have another part of the week. I have trained my instructional assistant or reading coach, or at this point, heck, a high school student who can read can, volunteer hours, civic hours in my classroom and do a 1-to-1 Story Champs lesson if I have trained them. Okay, there's no certification in Story Champs, and we don't want to make one. We want to make it accessible. So if you can read, you could do it. But this bottom little bullet, and this is bound to happen. So let's say, you are awesome and you have convinced your district to engage in MTSS for language, right? And you start doing universal screening class-wide. So the teachers deliver let's say it's 2nd grade, narrative language measures reading. So all the students get this benchmark in the fall. Well, if there's no prior history of Story Champs or like anything else, here's what's going to happen. Those kids will fail. And they're not, and by fail, I mean like they're not going to meet the grade level expectations. And the reason being, no one has, at that school, teachers were not provided resources like an academic oral language curriculum, so they haven't been working on language comprehension. So when you're asking the students to decode those words and they read 40 words in a minute and they could read that whole passage, and then you say, thanks for reading, now you tell me that story, and you turn that paper over, you take it away, that story, they're going to look at you with just wide eyes like, sorry, what? And this also happens with listening too, because no one has ever asked them to retell a story. They're expecting you to ask WH questions. I'm telling you that's what's going to happen. And they're going to bomb. And then the school's going to freak out because now in their mind, they've equated MTSS with RTI. So now they're like, oh, snap. Everybody gets an IEP. It's like Oprah dishing out IEPs. Like you get an eligibility and this SLP just quit because they're like, like I already have 60 kids on my caseload. Now I have like 500. Thanks. No thanks. That's not realistic, which means people aren't just they're not gonna assess, because if they think this would happen, they don't want to find a problem if they don't have a solution, right? And I would actually recommend that too. So if we suddenly started doing universal screening, we will find that students are not going to meet benchmark because previously, right, prior to this benchmark, they were not receiving instruction in language comprehension. So what that means is we need to start equipping our teachers at tier 1 with a program, an instructional program that addresses, and it needs to be evidence-based, but it needs to address vocabulary, complex sentences, discourse structure. It needs to include all of those things, modifiers, tier 2 vocabulary words, all of these things. And our students need to be able to retell a story that they just read or they just listened to. They absolutely should. And so that right there is what needs to happen, and that's not what's happening. Somehow folks are thinking that we should just wait till they fail and then give them oral language or oral narrative intervention. So who would benefit from it? All students. Simple answer. All students will benefit from explicit oral language instruction. Obviously, as I've been saying, and I keep harping on it because it's just depressing for me as a researcher to keep seeing it happen. And then and I know the solution, right? Like I know the answer. I feel like Dr. Fauci right now. I know what needs to happen. And I just see like, I don't know, almost like misinformation, like, that decoding is the only thing that's important in reading comprehension. Anyway, I'm not going to get in trouble right now. And so in most schools, there's just not enough emphasis on academic language. So these typically developing students who have average language skills, they actually could benefit from increased focus on academic facets of language. Story Champs is also vital for kids who are at risk for academic failure. So that's our students with disabilities or students who have a mismatch between their home language and that language that is expected of them in school that people aren't modifying. This is what they need to understand and speak and read. That there's a mismatch between culture, right? Like, so English language learners, for example. And then the fact that Story Champs is a multi-tiered curriculum, the lessons, they're easily differentiated. They almost come differentiated. They're for any student, they're for any group of students. And so think back, remember how like 1 out of 3 kids are not meeting academic reading standards. So Story Champs, and just the principles of language instruction that are generalizable across the curriculum, they're important for math, science, behavior, right? It is important to have something like that to give kids the boost they need to succeed and to, graduate from high school, to have opportunities for vocational advancement because they have these prerequisite skills that open doors and opportunities for them, right? Okay. So I just want to point out, so it's narrative intervention, especially. So explicit oral narrative intervention, it provides students with instruction in like very important things. 1, patterns of words. 2, patterns of sentences, and then 3, patterns of discourse. So we go from microstructure all the way up to macrostructure. Story Champs gives them a mechanism that then produces generative language, right? It just teaches them these tools that they can carry over and access other language opportunities. So if we're using Story Champs, what ends up happening is this. They receive narrative language intervention or instruction, right? And now they just talk more. They're reinforced then by their friends out when they're telling a story about their weekend or their holiday, or when they went to grandma's house, or they're reinforced by their teacher for telling a better story, right? The audience is actually more engaged and more entertained, the better the story. So this is a social skill. And so now kids are actually practicing more language. They're accessing more language in that classroom curriculum. And then really, it just takes a little while for all of this naturalistic input to just soak up and then just have the effect we're looking for. And what we're finding right now, super cool, in our research is that just by the narrative intervention piece, just by talking more, accessing more opportunities to talk and learn and converse with others, pick up new vocabulary, it just opens doors. That's actually having a delayed effect by improving kids' expository and information retell without explicitly teaching it. So again, Story Champs, it's our multi-tiered curriculum. Right, so we did the assessments. We find that we need to teach things. So at tier 1, here's where it comes with 1 kit. This single kit that is purchased, it has tier 1 lesson plans. So for a whole group, and what we consider is like students, 5 or more students. Okay, so this is just what everybody gets, right? And you can do in small group or you can do in large. But this is what everybody gets. Okay, they get access to a really high quality evidence-based instructional program. Then you've got tier 2, okay? And so tier 2 is our supplemental small group. It's like an extra dose, it's a booster shot. And then we've got tier 3. So again, all of these lesson plans come just in this 1 kit. You can use them or not. but they are there. So if you already have a kit and you're not using large group, I highly encourage you to try it out and push into like a gen ed setting or classroom and, show it off. It's pretty awesome. It's really the lessons based on the age and kind of how much time, if you're doing wait time, the lessons really only last about 15 to 25 minutes. They can go as long as 45 minutes for some students with really like small group. Yeah, small group, but that is a rarity. Okay, because that could be like writing or story generation writing. Okay. But basically I just want to point out that it is multi-tiered because of this aspect right here, and that the curriculum basically adheres to the same principles, the same effective instructional procedures in every tier. Okay, so not one is not more special than the other. And so excuse me. So we've got tons of targets. Another way that Story Champs is tiered is that we've got tons and tons of like language targets that you can find in the table of contents for the lesson plans. So we've got tons of lesson plans. We also have tons of stories. And so you can combine targets, lesson plans, and stories. So, I mean, honestly, make almost like an endless number of combinations. I don't recommend it, but I mean, that can happen. And so the interventionist really is the one who really has to be prepared. So use data to be to plan for what students need, and then use that progress monitoring like the cubed. Again, it's free. Why not? To make adjustments to the intervention as the students' needs change. And we do have school level, like district level purchases, like it's called Insight. It'll be available in the new year, but basically you can administer, deliver um, the universal screening and benchmarking and progress monitoring all on this one platform that's digital. And then it will show you, it will automatically score it, and it will help you group students and track them. And, the speech and language pathologist can access and see what the teacher has delivered. And it really promotes teamwork so that we can all see what's going on and where kids are at. And all kids are screened, and there's data for all students. So it also helps out when there's any concerns about language delays because everything's all in the system anyway. So this is also an example of like what it could look like. So this is a study, this is just one, we have tons, but this is one study that was in 2018. And then this was Story Champs, so a multi-tiered narrative intervention for preschoolers, a Head Start implementation study. And so this one right here, we looked at, how effective would Story Champs be on language comprehension skills of preschoolers. And so we also wanted to see, and this is important, what was intervention fidelity? Like how closely did the teachers and the teaching assistants, so they had high school diplomas, how closely did they follow the steps of the lesson plans? And then when they were administering the cubed measures, right, how reliable was their scoring process, right? And so we had all the students participated in one or two large group Story Champs lessons a week by the teacher, or the instructional assistant would run it. And then the students who needed it, some of them, the preschoolers would receive small group intervention twice a week. So that was standard. So 2 small group lessons a week for the ones that were at risk. And then a few of the students received one-on-one intervention for like a short period of time, obviously individualized, but we did want to, because time is of essence, and like staffing is always an issue. Money, it all comes down to money. But basically you don't want to keep someone in one-to-one if they don't need it, if they don't have identified DLD, right? So as a result of the study, this was over the course of an entire year. We had a control group, and we were not involved as researchers. We stayed out. Otherwise, this would have went perfectly, right? So, but the cool part is that in real world settings, this was implemented with fidelity, and the teachers and assistants were able to score the cubed measures with like reliably, without us needing to intervene at all. Right. And the students made significant gains. They had higher story retell and listening comprehension. We used a different outcome measure than the cubed. And they had, moderately sized improvements. Okay. So just to remind you, so we've got this intervention and we want to progress monitor and see if it's working. This is this is what it is. These are our assessments. These are the progress monitoring tools that we have for the cubed, and they're, again, available for free online. It comes with that download. So you're just kind of using them. You can use these flow charts that we have. If I zoom in here, if review the reading, retail, or listening, and then did they meet benchmark? No progress monitoring. If they were in a group that was considered high risk per these cut scores on page 53 of the manual, progress monitor every 2 weeks. We just kind of have this flow chart. Nothing is a rule. Here's an example, and I'm not going to go too much into this, but if your district is interested in creating a plan for MTSLS using Story Champs and Cubed, here is something that someone from Clay County, Florida, and I kind of worked on, in which we laid out a map to try to convince, and we did, the district to implement MTSLS in all VPK classrooms, which was super cool. And shout out to Robin. And then they ended up using it for Story Champs for ESY or summer school. And then we've got this slide. So with, given that we have a few more minutes left, I just want to point this out. So it is 100% worth your while to, put yourself out there and be brave and ask. Be the one that asks for school-wide MTSLS. Okay, first, it works. Okay, so when you've got this system in place, it's not just MTSS for reading. Like, we have language being supported in instruction. Basically, like, we just need an increased appreciation of explicit instruction in general, but everybody gives it lip service, right? But the minute that teachers, not just the specialists like SLPs, start using Story Champs, the students end up being the ones who reap the rewards, okay? Their speaking, listening skills improve. And it's just that Story Champs, because it comes already multi-tiered, that it provides this framework that just instruction gets better, right? And the teaching itself is explicit and systematic, okay? And then we've got, basically, because Story Champs supplements all kids, it really should be a part of the general education core curriculum, unless there are some other things that are available on the market that I don't know about that are evidence-based and have shown the effects that Story Champs has. Let me know, but they're really not there, that include all 3 levels of lesson plans already pre-made. You don't have to do anything. And then just this one right here, honestly, if you're an SLP and you're going to bat for MTSLS in your district, your role becomes, and your importance in language instruction as a preventative measure becomes almost integral to how successful that school is, okay? It helps you keep your job and also fight for more SLPs and maybe more funding. And if you have any questions about that, reach out to me. We can absolutely get you some data and some supports to help you make those arguments. So what we ask of you now at the end of this webinar, here's really some ideas. Please share the research. We have tons and tons of articles and infographics. Share stories of success. Like, if you're using Story Champs or the Cubed or both, please, like, don't just keep it to yourself. You can pretend like you bought the cubed measures and share them with Gen Ed and be like, I bought this for you. I'm not gonna, like, I don't know if you don't think they're gonna find out it's free, but I mean, they're awesome. Find an interested principal. I can help you write grants. So if you want to try to find funding mechanisms, or you find funding, like you find a grant and you want help writing it, I absolutely reach out to me. I will help you. It's a part of my job. And then train others. So here is my contact information. I'm so sorry you don't get to see my face and all of my facial expressions. Maybe I'll tape this again when I get home. But here you go. Here's my contact information right here. That's my personal email. You can visit our website. We offer trainings to districts. That's why I'm out here in Tacoma and Seattle right now. I'll head back to Florida on Friday. But yeah, we travel all over, and we love coming out to meet you in person. We also do virtual training. So reach out if you have any questions. I will send out a certificate for you to complete at let's say this weekend, with a link to the recording. Okay, so if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the box, and I'll stay on for a little bit to answer them. And to thank you for all of the praise and the feedback. Let's see. I'm going to look at our questions and answers. So someone had, for a tier 3 kid, is it beneficial to include this child in tier 2 and also do one-on-one? Or does this impede the tier 2? Lisa, that's a wonderful question. So how do you know whether to put a student who probably needs intensive supports in a small group or not? Okay, or just skip to one-on-one. In the Story Champs manual, we have a flow chart. Forget the page number, but we have a flow chart based on, like, you run the narrative language measures. Let's say it's listening. And if they got a score of a 4 or 5 on episode, it means they can tell an episode with tell a story with a complete episode. Then I would not, it basically tells you what kind of group to put them in. And if you follow those flow charts, Lisa, follow the flow chart in that manual. Oh my gosh, I just did this training today and I can't remember the page number. You'll end up with a stack, like let's say you have a bunch of students and you did all of the NLM listenings. You'll end up with a stack that basically represents your groups and like what lesson plan you're going to use for Story Champs. So for me, I have a small group. Let's say I have 3 kids that all need to learn just basic story structure. So it's 5 elements. That's a pile. And then I had this one kid that could tell a story with 5 elements, but they just didn't get the end feeling or a 2-point score for ending. Okay. But I've only have 1 kid right there. Right. And then I have a whole other group for kids that can retell a story with a complete episode, but their stories are very boring and they don't use a lot of complex linguistic features like causal or temporal subordinates or modifiers, just really boring stories. Let's say I have like 3 or 4 kids there. So what the decision that I make is that if I have a student that's kind of like a lone wolf, I will not put them in a small group because my lesson plan is going to be different. That the student who's kind of hanging out and just the only student that needs to work on enhanced story structure or like the 7 elements, they're going to get one-on-one. And I'm going to get them one-on-one until they can catch up with the kids and I can put them into the small group of language complexity. So if you have any like specific examples of narrative language measures like results and you want to meet via Zoom, I would be more than happy if you reach out to me and we can meet separately. Jillian, yes, this recorded webinar will be emailed to you. Would I still recommend, I've got someone anonymous, would I still recommend using Story Champs as RTI model or children with an IP? Absolutely. If you are not in control of the system because you're not a district administrator, you got to do what you got to do. And it's such an effective intervention program. You absolutely can use this for RTI and you should be. If you are in charge of making decisions about how to set up MTSLS, bless you. We should be talking. I would love to have more examples of districts that do this outside of Michigan. Michigan is just like a champion at this. But that's kind of where I would go ahead and recommend don't change what you're doing if it's working. It's effective as an intervention. It would be great if it was also a curriculum. And then Jillian asked, the pearls, I do not see the phonemic awareness decoding screeners. Where can this be found? Jillian, the Pearl assessment is a product that we have for sale on our website. It is not a part of the Cubed because it is not free. The Cubed is free to download. If you're going to go ahead and like print it out, it's free. But no, the Pearl is it is awesome, but it is something that is just a screener, and school districts need to be using it widely, so it is offered. You can check out the webinar that we have on our website. Lisa asks, Story Champs is available in Spanish. Is the Cubed assessment also available in Spanish? Lisa, the Cubed assessment, the free one, is available in Spanish only for preschool only at this time. Man, we keep putting on hold again because it's free. So our funding of really to improve the Cubed comes from sales of Story Champs at this point. We've had to put it on hold to have that kind of go to other grade levels. No one likes working for free. And so we haven't had a lot of volunteers to help us do that. So we used research assistants, and right now they are working on the Cubed and Story Champs and some other things. So hopefully that answers your question. But yes, it's available for free in Spanish, but only for the preschool level. Okay, I think that covers it for now. Thank you all for staying on. I really appreciate it.